Hi, my name is Mayenzeke Baza. I'm a film and TV producer from South Africa, but also I'm a director for international relations with the Association for Transformation in Film and TV. And we actually brought the delegation here to AFM for the first time.
Hi, I'm Tshego Molete. I am a South African independent producer with a company called Happy Brown Babies. I'm also a director for ATFT, that's the association that deals with transformation in film and TV, and we organized this trip to AFM of independent South African delegation.
Hi, I'm Mogajane, and I am an independent producer out of South Africa. My company is called Blitz Patrollie, and I'm here selling my product, a feature film that came out earlier this year. It's playing at the market, and I'm here packaging my next couple of films. I'm one of the producers that's a delegate of the group that's been put together by the ATFT.
So, Mayenzeke, you mentioned the Association for Transformation in Film and Television. What is that association? What does the association do exactly?
Basically, as I said, the association is a non-profit entity, and it basically empowers black filmmakers, black female producers, physically impaired producers or filmmakers within South Africa, and it really tries to empower and like inspire them to be able to take their products to export markets, but also facilitate programs that really specifically will help to grow the South African film and TV industry. Yeah, that's what we do.
What is the purpose of the group here at the American Film Market?
Well, the group basically comes here to sell their products. The group is comprised of different producers. For example, like Isaac, he's got a project, but some of the group don't have like finished projects. I guess they all have different purposes, you know. But to summarize, I think some came to sell, some came to explore the market so that they could find opportunities for co-production opportunities in the future, but also came to just to network, meet people, learn what the American market is all about, what is it that they need. Some came with maybe with projects at development stage, maybe to attach like an A-list cost. So we all came with different purposes. Yeah.
Isaac, you mentioned that you have a film that's screening here at the market. What is the name of the film? And you mentioned a sales agent. Do you have distribution for it already, or is it still? Is the sales agent still trying to sell it to a distributor?
Yeah, the sales agent is selling it to distributors at the moment. They're called Picture Tree International, a Berlin-based sales company. The film is called Blitz Patrollie, which is a very commercial action comedy out of South Africa, fully South African film, which makes it an interesting proposition to the world. I think it's still kind of unique because people are not used to seeing purely South African product yet, commercial product yet, and it's becoming more and more popular, which is good for us in the future. And it's been screening, so I'm still waiting to hear feedback on how well it's gone.
When you say fully South African, what makes a movie fully South African?
Well, what makes a film fully South African for me is if the context of the film is completely South African. So we have a very diverse culture because we've got so many different types of people in our country that there's no one type of South African persona. So our diversity is part of who we are. But if I would describe something being fully South African if it encompasses at least one of the cultures in our country. It could be multiple cultures, but at least one, and that's the culture that permeates throughout the film. As opposed to it being a film about people from other parts of the world being in South Africa or being American stories set in South Africa.
Okay, so a film being produced in South Africa would not be classified as a fully South African film?
Not necessarily, yeah.
Okay.
It's about the project itself. It's about
Right.
the actors that you have in the film. It's about the type of language that you use. It's about the target market.
Okay, and I asked this question because, like you said, there are so many different cultures in South Africa, and when you look at, for instance, the Afrikaans in South Africa, their films do very, very well from what I've observed. Why do you think that is? Why do you think their films do so well as opposed to Black South Africans, for instance, when Black South Africans make movies in South Africa?
Can I comment on that? I do think from our own perspective, I think the guys will correct me, is that, and again, in terms of the diversity of South Africa and where we come from, as a country politically. We come from years where Afrikaans language ruled for a long time. Not only in terms of economically, the Afrikaans community were the bosses. They were the guys who were in charge of the money and everything. So now what has happened is that over time is that whatever they do as a community, because now we've got the freedom, so they try to kind of like support each other. So whatever film they do, and most Afrikaans films it's always about their culture. It's always about preserving who they are. So the reason they do, one, they've got the money, so they can actually afford to pay for a ticket to go to cinema. And two, most cinemas are actually centered around communities where it's easy for them to access the market. And I think number three also is, again, it's about preserving the culture, and like any other country or any other culture that's about to be extinct or any group, they always try to kind of protect each other. So I think that's kind of my own perception. So for them, they do well at South African Post Office. I'm not sure about international, but South African Post Office, because of those things, according to me, that's why they do well.
Just to build on what Mayenzeke is saying, it is really about the infrastructure that we deal with in South Africa in terms of who can access it, and which means who the audience is that we can package a title for. And the Afrikaans community is one of the easiest because of everything he's been saying about the fact that there was a lot of emphasis placed on Afrikaans culture and how to pander to it basically for 40 years of our history. So it's easier to market something for the culture, and there's a particular trait in their culture where support for anything Afrikaans. I mean, it's the same in music in our country. South African Afrikaans artists also sell a lot because of that kind of thing. And we're in a phase in our country where we have to develop audience, what a South African audience is. And we're still trying to figure that out. And we have to figure out how to incorporate the Afrikaans market so that it's not just films that are targeted at Afrikaans audiences that are the well-to-do ones, Yeah.
Do you think that perhaps the number of cinemas in certain areas affects box office receipts for Black South African films as opposed to Afrikaans South African films? I mean, I don't know what it's like, in terms of accessibility for people who are looking for some of that content.
Yeah, it's definitely a big factor. It's hard for the typical South African person to get to a cinema. It's very expensive. Location-wise, they need to travel very far, which costs a lot of money to be able to access film. So because film is not necessarily a necessary good, it's very easy for you to rather prioritize other things rather than going very far out of your way and paying money that you have very little of to go consume it. I think something else that I just wanted to add on to the last point is that South Africa is in a very new space at the moment. We're emerging. We're a very young country, and part of what's happened with Afrikaans film is that it's developed over a very long time. The culture of consuming it has developed over a very long time. Whereas with Black people, that's not necessarily the case. It's still new to us. The concept of a fully Black African film, South African film, is still new. It's just over a decade old. So it's something that will happen. As people get used to the fact that we can go to the cinema and watch our own stories, then like the Afrikaans market, it will develop to a point where it becomes sustaining. And I suppose we play the role of pioneers, where we are creating the first kind of product that they can consume.
Right. So, and what I wanted to know too is what are your plans to make that a reality? How do you plan on making that happen?
Well, I mean, I don't know if the guys can. Just one more thing to go back again. I just want to explain the issue of Afrikaans also as a language. There's white Afrikaans, there's colored Afrikaans, there's different. Where Afrikaans is a language. I want to say it's an extinct language because we get a big community that speaks Afrikaans, whether they're Black or colored or white. White Afrikaans, yes, it definitely support each other, and I make that distinction because you do have Black, which is colored, and they also speak the language which is Afrikaans. So I do think there's an opportunity there, using that language and being able to tap in maybe into that kind of word called Afrikaans language. In terms of plans to change the space, in South Africa. I'm not sure. I think it's as I said. I know government is putting different things to try to define what is SA film in terms of how you can find films within South Africa, but also I think as independent producers or as filmmakers, we have to go on a journey to try and create our own audience in terms of the stories we tell. And also, I do think for me, we have to go away from. I know cinema is a big deal. People, it's come with prestige and all that. We need to find different distribution platforms where content will get to people, which will make people to kind of love what we do. You know, we've been fed for a long time, I think, especially in South Africa. I was talking to someone the other day that The Bold and the Beautiful, which is not really big, maybe in America, but it's very big in South Africa because people like to watch soapies. So for a long time, people are so glued to soapies. So we have to try to get people away from the soapies and start really creating content that people will want to see. And also I think we have to do our own distribution, alternative distribution platforms.
The internet, a viable distribution platform at the moment for South African content?
Not at the moment. I mean, it depends what you mean by viable, because if we're talking about South African content going to the international audience, then that is something we can explore. But within South Africa, our connectivity is not that great yet, and also the people that have access to broadband and online content is not that great either. So if we talk about alternative forms of distribution, maybe things like cell phones are something that can be explored because that's what more people have access to. But otherwise, we have only about 12% of the population is wired up, and it's a very specific part of the population, upwardly, like the upper LSMs and very urban based. So also very white mostly. So those are very particular types of stories that you can tell to those people. And then also, I mean, the viewership is quite low in terms of that also. Yeah.
I do think internet is the key. It's going to take a while, but it obviously transcends space, which is exactly what we need. As soon as our broadband capabilities pick up, then I think our distribution problems will be solved because it'll be a cheap way to get content to people. And until then, I suppose what with the earlier question about what we're doing about it, we are experimenting. I think we're the experimenters. We're the people who are going to figure it out for generations to come. So the important thing for me as an independent producer, as a black independent producer, is to push the boundary and give people a new kind of content, test them. You know, we're still learning what is the type of cinema that our people love. And I think Nigerians have already figured it out. They figured it out a while back that there's a certain kind of product that is consumed by the mass market religiously. We don't know what that is yet. So it's a nice place to be because you get to be very kind of experimental, and it's fun because you can try different things and people are willing to hear different things. Whereas a mature market like the States, it's difficult for you to come in with something new because there's a lot of people who believe they know how it works. Right. They'll tell you if you don't have this kind of cast, it's not going to work. If your story is not genre, it's not going to work. Whereas back home, we have the space to invent those rules. So I think we are, as difficult as it is for us at the moment being independent producers, we're also at a very exciting phase that generations to come won't experience.
Right,
Yeah,
but
and just adding on that, one of ATFT's specific goals is also to upskill independent filmmakers, especially black filmmakers, because there's also a certain way that filmmakers are trained, and we look towards the European model where it's very much about dramas, kind of the epitome, and the way that we tell stories. We also look at like American, the 3-act structure, classic Hollywood, and where we have to also figure out what Isaac is saying is figure out what it is that our local people enjoy, and sort of move in those arenas also, just to try and grow an audience, because there's a cry that we always complain about as filmmakers back home, that we don't have audience, like things don't sell, just don't have audience, people are not watching. And a lot of the time is that filmmakers can be quite insular, so they make films for themselves and their peers, whereas we need to also learn how to just tell a fun story. It's not always going to be about AIDS and crime or Mandela, really. That people have everyday concerns, and we need to make the story relevant to them too.
you talked about being experimental, which is a good thing, but you are here in the US where it's a mature industry. How are you going to break into the industry, which I'm assuming is one of your purpose if you're trying to sell your films to an American audience?
I mean, I think we experiment in terms of creating an audience for ourselves back home, you know, and I do think this is an international thing. If Americans do not like and they don't know South African actors, they're not going to watch the stuff that we do, you know. We have to start with this thing at home. Whether the Brits, it will go the same as the Brits, or it will go the same as Brazilians or Asia, for example. But with this kind of market, I do think for me the solution, the issues around co-production, and I think that's why they exist. You know, as much as you experiment, you need to work with partners that share the same thing, who come from that market. You know, if I work with an American-based producer and I want to create a story that will go for both countries, so you'll be able to tell me you understand your market. You know, I think co-production opportunities are probably the best way to try and access international markets. You know, finding partners in those countries. I know people for a long time we've had, and people always cry about people coming from outside the country to come steal African stories, for example, where we'll have someone from America to come and do a story about Africa for American audience. You know, they've got a big audience, it works for them. But it's hard for me to come to America and do a story for African audience, you know, because I do not have a space yet. You know, I do not have an audience yet to give that or whatever that project to. So yes, we experimented, I think, for me in terms of our own audience back home, but in terms of these bigger markets, we here to kind of try to play in that space. The only way is through co-production, is through working with people from that market. I mean, back home we're very big in terms of servicing companies, but in terms of producing equal content, it's going to be a long time. As black filmmakers, I think we need to start working with black producers or producers from within that space, especially say for the US. We need to start finding those co-production deals in order to be able to access that market.
And also just generally, I mean, this is the first delegation to the American film market, South African delegation. Other people have come independently, the big guys back home will know how it works here. But as emerging producers, I mean, first and foremost, as the inaugural delegation is to just figure out how it works. I mean, if you're sitting back home and, you know, we're making a story and it just won't work in the US if we don't know how the US works. So coming here to find out, you know, how do you package a story? If you've got a story back home and you want to bring it here, do you reversion it for the American market? Do you just rewrite the scripts and attach a local actor? You know, how do you make your story work for a wider audience? And basically that's what we're doing here. For a lot of us, you know, you're just making connections, speaking to people, gathering an arsenal of information. So when you go back home and you want to break wider than the South African market, then you know how to do it, and you're more informed about, you know, how you do your stories then.
What are your thoughts as South African filmmakers on that? A lot of these films being made about Mandela with American stars in them. What are your thoughts from a producer's standpoint?
Okay, so the South African market is a very small market, right? And that's kind of an issue that we face. To monetize, to make something pay itself off with the South African market is a difficult task. So it's kind of it's a toss-up. If we want to make a film of the scale that we would like to see, big, like the Long Walk to Freedom film, $30 million. You can't exclusively rely on the South African market, because what will happen is that money you'll never see it again. So you need to inject elements into the story that make it universal. And actors are the easiest way to do it. So a part of me, from a producer's perspective, I 100% understand why, because Idris Elba is a global star, and just by having him there, that story is going to be seen by millions more people than if you kind of just stuck with the South African star. As South Africans, we do feel a little bit touchy about it, because we ask ourselves, why can't a South African play the role? But I think it's something that, as a producer, you have to often ignore. You know, and what I like to see happening in films is where you use global talent to lift up and create new talent that is South African. So and it happens in the Long Walk to Freedom. There's a lot of South African stars that are now acting alongside Naomi Harris and Idris Elba, and the world is going to see these guys for the first time. We just saw Fana Mokoena in World War Z opposite Brad Pitt. You know, Fana Mokoena is now a guy that I don't know how many millions of people watched and are going to recognize in his next film. we have to develop our stars. We can never just take somebody from Norway and then suddenly make them a global star. And sometimes that means playing the game to a certain extent.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it's a little schizophrenic also, because we have to also look at the audience back home. You know, people have watched The Wire, now referring back to Long to Freedom, and you know, just the buzz that the movie came with back home already, just because Idris Elba was the lead. It's a little hypocritical also for people that complain about the fact that it's not South African stars, because I mean, how many people would have watched if it's one of our local soap actors, for example? He may be great, we're giving him great opportunity, but the people are not going to pay as much attention to him as a guy who's been seen all over the world. And you know, we have a lot of American media fed to us back home, so they also get a lot more attention than the local stars, and it just makes sense because they also will make your movie get seen more. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Go.
This last thing, it's also something that is not unique to South Africa, you know, and I think a lot of time people personalize these things, especially when there's, you know, South Africa versus the big bad world. But it's anywhere in the world, you know. If I wanted to make a film about a German figure and I wanted the whole world to see that, then generally I need to get a global star to do it. Unfortunately, most of those stars come from the UK and America, because those are the biggest English-speaking territories. So it's a price you pay for not being American, to be honest with you.
And I mean, I think it is business. For me as a producer, I want something that's going to make me money. And if Isaac's not going to make me money, I'm not going to make him Mandela, you know. So I think.
Well, okay.
So, but again, I guess we're very sentimental about. I come from background of documentaries. You know, we're very sentimental about our stories. You know, that this is my story, no one should tell it. And again, yes, for us to get to that space, there's a lot of work that we have to do, you know, because if we want to tell an American story in South Africa, really, there's no audience for that, you know. So in a way, I do think it's fine to be sentimental, because artists are like that anyway. But again, producers, which some are artists, some are just business people, it's purely business, you know. And I'm not really attached to the fact that you could tell the story about my grandma, about Mandela. For me, it doesn't bother me whether it's Idris Elba or it's Fana Mokoena. It doesn't matter, as long as that film is going to make money.
And you know, and I mean, it's an important story. And by doing this, the whole world will see the story. So you can kind of hold on to it and say, we're just going to make it for South Africa, and we already know it.
Right.
So it does help profile it.
And you said you come from a background of documentaries. You already told us what your main project is here at AFM. Can you tell us about your documentary? I think it's called I Am a Man. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I'm going to let you guys go in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to know a little bit about your project and Tshego's project.
Well, like I said, okay, I'll tell you. But also, I don't necessarily make documentaries, you know. But the project I'm working is How to Lose Your Penis in 10 Days. Okay, I'm just kidding. But it's about, basically, it's about male circumcision, which is a very, very sore point in my country, you know. It's a rite of passage into manhood. The second largest tribal group, or the second largest nation, let me put it that way, which is the Tokoloshe people. It's what they believe in. But again, there's other kind of different groups who do the same thing. So over the past 10, 15 years, it's been compromised because boys have been dying and others losing their penises. So basically, my film follows and why we still do it, even though it's compromised. You know, why can't we do it medically? So that's the film I make. I made the first part, which is I'm a Man, for Al Jazeera, but now I'm doing a feature length, which looks at all the complications around it, you know. But yeah, it's that kind of, it's a personal documentary for me because I was circumcised and I went through it myself, and I've seen boys dying in front of me, so others losing their penises. So yeah, for that, that's the kind of docus I'm making.
And you, Tshego?
I also come from a documentary background, but I'm here with a TV feature, and it actually brings up all the issues that we're discussing now, because we have a lead who's quite big back home, is a really good actor, but you know, he's not known in America, so we're trying to find out a way to package, you know, how to make the film sell this side. It's a film noir, it's a genre film, a thriller, that's a detective thriller that's set in Johannesburg about a murder that turns out not quite to be a murder, and the complications around figuring that out for a PI called Dick Dube. Yeah.
So what's next for the group? What after this market? I'm assuming the association will send a group of filmmakers to a different market. What's next for the group, and what is your selection process?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as an association, basically, and I'll put this out bluntly, is our focus is black filmmakers, you know, whether it be black women, black men, or you are physically impaired. So the next kind of like markets, we plan to be going to all the different markets. And it's part of the strategy so that our emerging filmmakers or some of the experienced black filmmakers to have access to these markets and be able to sell their projects. So, and I think our next market will be Berlin. So we're going to the European film market for people to, you know, to do a similar thing as what guys did at AFM, explore the market, sell your project. In terms of the selection process, we serve our clients, which is, as I mentioned earlier, they must be black or disabled. So people get into our database, which is a TFT database, and with the market we're going to, we just send a call out to them, so they all apply. The scheme usually takes about 20 people, which is funded by the Department of Trade and the DTI. But it's been great in a way that we didn't have to kick anyone out, you know. So the selection has been less than the actual number. We've never got people more than 20 yet. And I think because people haven't really kind of understood, but also people rotate in terms of markets. For other people, the people who came to FM may not necessarily want to go to EFM. So that's kind of so we never say you can't go. But it's easy. One of the things, you need to have a company, and you need to be complying with kind of like our government tax regulation, basically, as an operating company, and you need to have been operating for over a year. So, and you need to be black. So those are the things. That's what we definitely do.
But you're not all black.
Yeah, I was just about to
gonna
add
get to that,
a footnote to that. We have a special sort of 5 places that we set aside if we're taking 20 for more experienced filmmakers. Those would be the white filmmakers that come on as mentors, because some producers won't really know what they're doing. They still have to find their feet. So what we try and do, the theory is that we get people that are more experienced to, if they want to come with us and use our resources and make use of the stands or whatever that we put together, then they mentor a young black producer. So like make sure that they know how to operate in a market, use their expertise so that they can grow another producer who can then export a title from South Africa. And what we also do is we do, after the market call out, we then have a workshop where we bring someone from the specific market that we're going to, who knows that market, operates in that market. They come over for a workshop, and we call it a market readiness workshop. The person will tell people how to prepare for a market and what the do's and don'ts are at a market, and just generally in their sphere of influence, whether it's America or Europe or wherever we're going, basically how filmmaking there works and how to do business in that sphere.
Okay. Is there anything else you guys would like to add for the American audience? Actually, a global audience, really.
Yeah, I think South Africa is in a unique position where we can actually become quite a bit of a powerhouse on the global scene. There's a lot of factors that make us a very good place to film, and you can take advantage of it as a local producer by there's a lot of good incentives. I think we've got some of the best incentives in the world. We've got great locations, we've got great population, and we've got good infrastructure where you can be able to shoot your film at a cheaper cost, purely because everything, without compromising quality, is slightly cheaper. So as a South African producer, I'm using that as my selling card. When I'm meeting agents out here, I'm telling them that I'm producing films that are going to be value-wise worth a lot more than they are, and that's something that I think we need more producers back home taking advantage of. But also, it's we have a history of servicing, where people are taking advantage of that by partnering with South Africans just to facilitate the production and access the incentives. And I'd like to see a shift happen where the IP is held by South Africans, and when the monetization of the project happens, it flows back into South Africa. And ATFT is a great platform for guys like us to come out here and meet people and sell ourselves and sell our country directly, so that they come through us as opposed to just servicing it and keeping the money for themselves. And my long-term goal is, it's great that these guys are giving us the start, and I think the idea should be to kind of not need them and move on your own and let somebody else take the advantages of joining an organization like ATFT, and you can find your own travels through your own success. So it's a great project.
Excellent. Can you just give us the website address for your association before we leave?
Yeah. Well, basically is www.filmandtvtransformation.org. Please come through, have a look, send us a message, talk to us.